Okay, I just want to welcome everybody here. It's the Art Residency Centre, Gaborone, Botswana Reading Club. And this is a project that I've been working on for 11 years. And you are the very first group of people that I am publicly reading to from the book. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about the project, and then I'm going to read you the story that's in this book. So in 2012, I was in London and I was doing an art residency, and I went to the Royal Geographic Society in London, and I discovered this book, and it's called Views in the Interior of Guyana, and it's by Robert Schomburg, who is a German geographer, a German-British geographer, who was commissioned by the Royal Geographic Society to go to Guyana, which had just become a British colony, to check it out and to see what was there and what could be useful. And so he spent the last half of the 1830s in Guyana, looking at plants and animals and people and landscapes and making notes. And he came back in 1840, and the end result of this travel was this incredible book. And this is actually an original copy. And it's meant to be touched. So after I've done this, I would love everyone to come and have a look at it. It's extremely beautiful. Views in the Interior of Guyana, and it has 12 full-color litho plates in it. At that point, I have to tell you, by the way, that my name's Ann Mary Gollifer, and that my mum is Warau Arawak from Guyana, Amerindian, and my dad is English from Essex, England, and that my whole upbringing was in English. So my mother's side of my being was silent or hidden, not on purpose. It was just the way it happened. But I got to that time in my life when I desperately needed to know more about where she came from. I was born in Guyana, in her village, and where my grandparents came from and how I fitted into that picture. So in 2014, this was 2012 when I saw this beautiful book, I decided I went back to Guyana with my parents, with my mum and dad and my brother, and we went to the village where I was born, and I took hundreds and hundreds of photographs, and it was there that I decided that I would make my own views in the interior of Guyana, and I would have lithographic plates. I didn't know how to make lithographs at that point. So basically over the next several years, I collaborated with the printmaker in Johannesburg, Joe Lachate, and together he taught me how to do lithographs, and I made this book here. So now what I would like to do is, Schomburg had these beautiful images in his book, but he also had a heavy text, a very good text in terms of naturalism, and at that time the European interest in exotic places. But strangely enough, he was unusually kind to the indigenous peoples of Guyana, the Amerindians, and his kindest thing that he could say, that the women were by no means unpleasant looking, and that he was very worried about them becoming slaved from Venezuela and Brazil, and he felt that they were capable of becoming fine Christian gentlemen. So that was actually a nice way of saying he thought they were sort of almost human. Wow. So my book is an answer to him, and it's called Views in the Interior of Guyana by Ann Mary Gollifer. And the whole thing was made and put together by Joe Lachate in Johannesburg, LL Editions, lithographic master printer, and by Lunetta Bartz, probably the best bookmaker in South Africa. She works for William Kentridge, and people like that who are very special. So I'm going to read you the story that I wrote in this book. Let me just move it over a bit. Views in the interior of Guyana. My motherland is on a border, and is at a border, and is a border, going nowhere, but everywhere, leaving and staying, to and fro, all my life, like the sea and its restless tides. Nothing can begin, and therefore can never end. I am Guyana, a small piece of South America, mostly belonging to everywhere. Akawayo, Arawak, Arakuna, Atorada, Awake, Carib, Kalina, Makushi, Mapidan, Mawayana, Nepuyo, Patamona, Waiwai, Wapishana, Waro, Yao, and Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Congo, Ghana, Togo, Botswana, Canton, southern China and the Pearl River, Madeira, Amsterdam, London. I am part of the Caribbean, drifting into myth, in and out of ruin, a lost world, adrift in the imagination, like El Dorado, disappearing into the mainland rivers, swamps and mountains, great grassy plains of another continent. Ah, that explains your unfamiliar beauty, said the old painter, observing me from a distance. Her technical skill rendered pain exquisitely. She was renowned for her synthesis of the ugly and the beautiful. I was not sure if her comment about my appearance was a compliment or an insult. It triggered a memory of myself at 14, self-conscious, standing in a changing room, surrounded by mirrors that revealed my face at an odd angle. I did not recognize the sallow cheek that seemed to squeeze my eye into a small dark crease, or the thin upper lip that covered my teeth like a beak above a sharp chin. I realized with shock that my look was different to that of my pretty English friend standing beside me in her new frock. Searching for a meaning to match this experience of seeing myself as others did, I remembered my mother saying, "Never mind if you're different." It was her way of trying to make me aware that I might not quite fit into the world I was about to enter. She left me in an English boarding school when I was 7, and I lost her lilting tongue. It was replaced by a received English accent that to this day confuses people about my origins. It has taken me a lifetime to rediscover where I come from, who I am. I never asked my mother how she felt about my change of accent, but she explained how when she was a child in school, the nuns had discouraged all the students from speaking their mother tongues. I asked her how she felt about that, and her answer filled us both with sadness. Now I wish I had learnt their languages, my mother's, my father's. Your grandfather was such a clever man. He spoke Warao, Arawak, Spanish and English. I only speak English. My mother has Amerindian heritage, from my grandmother Warao, from my grandfather Arawak. They lived on the Aruka River on the hills that rise up out of the lowland coastal swamps of the northwest district of what was British Guyana, now Guyana, renamed at independence from Britain in 1966. My mother's people have lived in this area of the Guyana Shield, practicing the complex horticulture of cassava cultivation there, with Arawak peoples for over 4,000 years. I was born in Mabaruma Hospital, 2 miles from Hossorora Hill, my first home. I left Guyana with my mother when I was 2 years old, returning intermittently up until I was 16, and then not again for 38 years. When I did return, it was from Botswana, where I have settled. On that first visit, after so many years, I remember standing at the back of Auntie Mada's house in the wet grass at dawn, looking down across swamp and forest towards Venezuela and the Schomburg Line. Hossorora lies about 20 miles from the border, named after the British-German geographer who was commissioned to map the boundaries of the colony in the 1840s. Watching the mist rising off the land, it occurred to me that nothing had changed in that view since Schomburgk had drawn his line. My father, a fledgling agronomist, was 22 years old when he first arrived in Hossorora to help run the agricultural station there in 1957. I have asked myself many times how and why he landed up there of all places. He told me he had always wanted to be a farmer, but his family did not own land, so he went to university instead. He spent more time mountaineering than studying and graduated with a third. His tutor advised him to join the British Overseas Department of Technical Cooperation instead of doing a master's at Cambridge. Like many other curious young people without any plans, Dad left the dreariness of post-war Britain to explore the world. He was sent to British Guyana. When he first arrived in Hossororo, he spent the evenings listening to cicadas. From his window he watched a Warao woman collecting firewood for her hearth. He employed a clever old Spanish Arawak man for bush clearing around the station. 3 years later, these two would become his parents-in-law. Crazy story. Oh dear. Anyway, let me go on. He played football with my mother's brothers before he met her. When I asked him how they eventually got together, he told me that whenever she heard the sound of his Land Rover engine coming along the road, she would shin down the steep bank behind her house and wait. Everyone went to Gaborone for the Friday or Saturday night dance. My mother says Dad was very shy and a terrible dancer. At the time, she was one of the first batch of Amerindian student teachers at the Roman Catholic school she had attended as a child. She was the one, he said. She was extraordinary, so beautiful, and I seemed to make her laugh. He would watch for her coming down the path to collect water from the falls and offer to fill her bucket from his water tank, cutting her journey in half. He delivered milk from the station dairy to her household under the watchful eye of my grandmother. Fresh milk, butter and cheese, along with hot showers, are luxuries in Hossorora to this day. As Dad says, the only thing that has changed in the Northwest District is its name, now known as the Barima Waini, Region 1, the Forgotten Province. I remember my astonishment when I discovered a mysterious painting in the October Gallery in London titled Hossororo. It was a square of soft greens swirling around 3 warm brown ovals enmeshed in strange white symbols. I found out that the artist was a Guyanese painter called Aubrey Williams. He said of his posting to Hossorora as an agricultural extension officer in the 1940s, a decade before my father's arrival, that it was like being sent to Siberia. But the experience turned him into an artist, inspired by Amerindian culture and the Greek creeks and jungles of swamp and rainforest. The painting danced in front of my eyes. It must be the only painting of Hossorora in the whole world, I thought. I begged my brothers and sister to help me raise the money to buy it. They advised me instead to return to Hossorora and make my own painting. And so began the long process of finding my way home. The journey started in earnest in 2012, when I decided to spend 3 months in London on a self-funded residency. It was my way of coping with my sons leaving our home in Gaborone, Botswana, to settle in Sweden, their father's homeland. I visited the Royal Geographic Society in London and discovered the Schomburgk archive and his beautiful book titled Views in the Interior of Guyana. 2 years later, I was standing on the edge of Hossororo Hill, gazing out across the jungle towards Venezuela. The view, a mass of intense green, swirling around isolated lateritic hills, gradually softens towards a distant horizon where the land meets sky. Perhaps Aubrey Williams had stood in this exact spot, watching the morning mist rise off the swamps. The hidden trails that cross this landscape are ancient footpaths on terra firma that meander from hill to hill. All else is swamp, crisscrossed by blackwater creeks that are navigable only by canoe. Just before dawn, you can hear the howler monkeys calling. Their eerie voice sounds something like a jet flying overhead. But in this part of the world, there are no vapor trails in the sky. Each morning around 4 a.m., Cockerels start the day with a round of crowing that seems to start in a homestead on some sailing far away and then runs like a rising tide to break and wash up against the wooden frames of our house on the hill. Each household around us has a white-eyed parakeet called Laura or a blue and yellow macaw called Robert. Throughout the steamy day, macaw, blue and yellow, scarlet and green, flap across the sky, shrieking like raptors in a Jurassic Park. There are black and white toucans with yellow bills, hummingbirds the size of bumblebees. For weeks after I have left Guyana, the view across the road from my Auntie Mada's house is one that gets imprinted on my eyelids and remains there when I close my eyes. Coconut, ite, manicole, a karuru palm, standing in lines across the horizon against a constantly changing sky of white, pink, violet, blue, and gunmetal grey. I watch the daily rains come gushing in, dumping the raindrops that hammer on the tin roof as they fall and swirl down the holes and broken gutters, making raindrop patterns on the wooden floors. After that first overwhelming journey back to Guyana, I decided that I would make my own version of Schomburgk's views. I have continued to return there with my parents, my brother and sister, my sons and my husband. This book celebrates the Amerindian family we rediscovered in Hossororo, and our many relatives now spread across Guyana, the Caribbean, the world, and their dynamic mix of race and cultures. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see my aunties and cousins looking back at me, familiar faces. There is no land route to Mabaruma and Hossororo from Georgetown, the capital of Guyana. You can either fly over endless rainforest canopy or travel northwest by boat out into the shallow alluvial wash pouring into the Atlantic from the great river systems of the Amazon, the Essequibo and the Orinoco. At Shell Beach you turn into the Waini River mouth and through the Mora Passage, Morawana Creek, and then into the Barima River that winds through mangrove swamps where it finds its tributary, the Aruka River. At the Kumaka landing, my cousin Buffy's minibus is waiting to take us up the hill to Hossororo. I imagine carrying my paintings and the lithographs there, bringing the journey full circle back to its place of origin. I walk the concrete highways, blue morpho rising from the forest floor inside me. Say my name. I walk the empty malls, mora leaf falling through the stillness inside me. Say my name. I walk in glass reflections, a fall of flowers scattering violet inside me. Say my name. I walk through changing lights, an orchid scent fills the silence inside me. Say my name. I walk into the shadow of an underpass. Creek water runs red through the manicle roots inside me. Say my name. The Guyana Shield is a 1.7 billion year old Precambrian geological formation that is a portion of the northeastern coast of the South American continent. It is comprised of an island of approximately 1,000 millions, I'm terrible at numbers, square kilometers. Yeah. We won't reference the president in South Africa. Sorry. Okay, anyway, bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to the east, the Amazon River forms the southern boundary and her tributary, the Rio Negro, turns northwest. From the Rio Negro, the Casiquiare River, a natural canal, dissects the watershed and connects the Amazon Basin to the Orinoco Basin to the north, and thus completes the circumvention of the island of Guyana. The 5 Guyanas of today, political superimpositions over geographical reality, include Venezuelan Guyana, Guyana, formerly British, Suriname, formerly Dutch, French Guyana, and the state of Amapa in Brazil, as well as an area of Colombia. Dennis Williams, Guyana's first director of art, a visual artist himself, as well as art historian, author, ethnologist and archaeologist, did much of his primary research on the Hosorora Hill. There he investigated the shell middens that have held the secrets of our Amerindian past for millennia. As the first native archaeologist, he was able to piece together the story of the lowland and rainforest cultures that have inhabited the area for thousands of years, forming carefully maintained trading networks that stretch from the Pacaraima Highlands to the Atlantic coast, running along the great river systems of the Orinoco, the Essequibo and the Amazon. These systems linked the Andean culture to the far west with our rainforest and coastal cultures. Dennis Williams threw out European and North American academic theories that postulated that the indigenous populations of the Guyana Shield were nothing more than a marginal people, devolved and diminished versions of more sophisticated cultures to the north and west. With an artist's heart, he studied their petroglyphs and pictographs, their stone tools and ceramics, and found in them evidence to suggest otherwise. In his words, our ancestors understood the need to honor and maintain the complicated environments that sustained them. Their story is one of thousands of years of horticultural subsistence, nurtured and held together by common traditions across time and space. When Sir Walter Raleigh first heard of El Dorado, he had no idea that the treasures he was desperate to find lay not in golden cities and lost civilizations, but in the Manioc mother and her children, the gilded dead, sent on their way west to feed the ancestors and maintain the well-being of the living on earth. Within 300 years, the impact of European contact on carefully cultivated ancient Amerindian trade routes within the island of Guyana were destroyed, along with the cultures that had maintained them over the previous 3,000 years. The Amerindian peoples of the Guyana Shield not only understood how essential it was to keep a balance between man's needs and the survival of the environment that kept him alive, but also the necessity for cooperation and exchange between peoples who cross paths. This pragmatism is recorded in shared spiritual customs that are preserved in ceramic traditions that have survived over thousands of years. The Guyana Shield of South America, the British Isles and Africa form a geographical triangle that cannot help but reference the slave trade and European colonialism, a world geography overlaid by human histories. I wish to tell a story that belongs to every human being and offers one example of the myriad ways a story can be told. My work, Views in the Interior of Guyana, is a celebration of the current population of Guyana and commemorates our pre-Columbian ancestors. In both size and format, my Views in the Interior of Guyana is a close copy of Robert Herman Schomburg's illustrated book, Views in the Interior of Guyana, published in 1840. Where his work was commissioned by the Royal Geographic Society and paid for by the rich and powerful of his day, my work is autoethnographic, and I have paid for it myself. The images in this book, like those in Schomburg's, are handmade color lithographic copies of 12 paintings in watercolor on paper, themselves copies of photographs taken on my return to Guyana after 38 years' absence. This process that has evolved over the course of 8 years reflects a personal search for identity, initiating dialogues around migration, displacement, and the search for physical and metaphysical home. For translation from photograph to painting, I chose to use the medium of watercolor on paper. Watercolor references specific histories described by the earliest explorers, sailors, scientists, missionaries, and adventurers from Europe, spread across the face of the earth, recording everything they saw, heard, smelt, and tasted. They often used the medium of watercolor to bring to life their inventories of landscapes and peoples. The medium references a past genre of picture making embedded in colonial constructs, and this makes it a perfect channel for dialogue between the past and present, the individual and the collective. My collaboration with South African master printer Leshoko Joe Lechate and the multiple layers and transformations it's required of my paintings, themselves transformations from original photographs and notes, parallels the process that took place in the 19th century for Schomburgk's book of Vies. My collaboration with Iloshoku celebrates partnerships built across borders that through a shared material practice does away with boundary lines and walls. That's it. I have never read that out loud to anyone before, so you are the first.
I was with you.
It was lovely. Well done.
Beautiful.
Wow.
That was
amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Anne.
Thank
A
you.
journey
I've never
on
been
so
more
many
inspired
levels.
than today.
You know?
Like I feel like, yeah, this is.
You read us a bit about a month ago.
The poem, I think, the very first piece that I read.
Just a taste.
And I wrote that in Sweden in 2018. And this text has been going for years.